The N64 was a classic video game console, even when I was growing up. And looking back on it, a lot of these games had fantastic endings. So today, I decided it was time to count down the top 10 best N64 endings. Let's get right into it. Donkey Kong 64 was actually the first N64 game I ever owned. And thinking back on it, it was strange that it took me so long to get 100% through the game. I suppose the game is so lengthy and so ridiculous, it was kind of intimidating for a kid to get through. And as it so happens, even back then, I was putting off great games until I had the time or the ability to come back and finish them completely. But when I did, when I 100% completed Donkey Kong 64, experienced that ending cutscene, that like incredible five-phase boss fight featuring every single Kong with their unique abilities, their their powers, you are their powers and their skills, you are essentially treated to like this very long, lengthy cutscene that really demonstrates like the creativity and like the vastness of this world. It really gives a chance for a lot of the minor characters to shine and really and really demonstrate their ability to succeed despite being not being playable characters. In a way, this feels like a massive send off to Rareware's legacy with era of Donkey Kong, because after this they never produced another Donkey Kong Country game. Considering what they'd put out before this, the Donkey Kong Country trilogy, Diddy Kong Racing, and this is probably the strongest period in the character's history. And to see them go off with such style, it's very, very heartwarming. It's cool, it's original, it has a lot going for it. It always brings a smile to my face. This is a game that I think is vastly overlooked, and this is just one of the examples why. Pokemon Snap is an interesting N64 game because I see it as being the first game that really taught me that games can be about more than like fighting bad guys or shooting things. It's a game about photography. It's a game that really emphasizes the strength of the Pokemon IP, how it's a fleshed out fantasy universe that has all these interesting characters, creatures that you can find in a wide variety of locations. And this credit sequence where you find every single Pokemon, you uncover them all, you snap them all, as you could say, as they said in the marketing material. When you see this credit sequence and you see these photographs that you took, oh, taking up the page, it really gives you the chance to reflect on what you just experienced. It is a major reason why I think this game is so fondly remembered, is that like the game does have a lot of emotional weight to it. It does feel rather different than essentially every game ever made. It does feel, I think it was this game title in particular that really made me realize just how special the Pokemon IP actually was. It's about more than just catching monsters and battling them. The creators put a lot of time and effort into making each of these animals into like real distinct creatures that you can like appreciate the finer details of. And there's some real artistry and talent there. And Pokemon Snap, I think, is the first example where even us stupid kids could pick up on that. It might be weird to say that Mario Party 2 can have good endings, but I unironically really, really love the setup that you get whenever you finish a board in Mario Party 2. It's not just you being declared the winner or the winner being declared the winner. You get a little cutscene, a little scenario of the person who came in first place like defeating the bad guy, the evil Bowser, and claiming their role as the superstar. You get a wide range of really creative situations here. Uh, in between like Indiana Jones archaeological adventures, in between like piracy, in between like spaceship, like Buzz Lightyear style like space adventures, you get all sorts of like crazy. You get into all sorts of crazy like imaginative situations, and honestly, a lot of these feel like they really could be their own game. Like the plot to Mario Party 2 is surprisingly well thought out, surprisingly fun, and surprisingly enjoyable. I played the game recently on Nintendo Switch Online, and I was kind of surprised at how like invested I got in like the animation and the music and the sound effects and just like the general presentation. I even noted that the game is actually very reminiscent of Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, and and Super Mario Bros. 3 in that it uses like a play to kind of establish the setting and the general idea of the plot. It seems like Mario is intrinsically associated with like plays and theater, which is kind of a weird thing to think about, but I swear it is true. Another strange entry on this list, in my opinion, is Mario Party Three's ending. It's kind of strange to admit that Hudson's era of Mario Party actually had compelling plots and stuff that actually kept me invested as a kid. Because I explicitly remember being rather taken aback by this surprise ending. So what is the twist of Mario Party 3? Well, throughout the game, the characters are competing to try and fi- claim the role of Millennium Superstar. They are essentially taking the Mario Party challenge to prove themselves to this like great divine being that only appears once every 1,000 years. And this star, you know, runs you ragged throughout the game. You know, talks down to you constantly. Forces you to prove yourself over and over and over again, and finally you are asked to compete like one last challenge with it, to to battle in a one-on-one mini game with it. And the mini game is fun. It's interesting. It's challenging. It's unique. It's unlike anything else you've ever seen before. And when you win, the star admits that it's not actually the Millennium Star, and it's just an imposter. And then like the real Millennium Star appears and declares you the superstar. It is like it's not much, but like to a kid who's never gotten like a surprise twist ending like that before, it actually felt it actually felt like an unexpected plot twist. It really felt like it really meant something. And like looking back at Mario Party 3, looking back at how much I like found myself invested in like the characters and what was going on in the competition. This was my introduction to Daisy and Waluigi. Actually, I had never seen those characters before I played this game. Looking back on this title, it probably is a big reason why I'm such a big fan of the wider Mario IP. I played Mario Party 2 first and I love it a lot, but Mario Party 3 I think really cemented like how even a small spin-off title like this can leave a major impact on someone. And in that case, that someone was me. Hey, remember when Rareware used to be good? Yeah, I know this might be a strange concept for those of you who grew up with Perfect Dark Zero, Cameo of Elements of Power, and Sea of Thieves, but Rareware used to be the premier video game developer when they were developing Nintendo exclusives on Nintendo platforms, particularly the N64. And I think the very pinnacle of their work with Nintendo, of the original content they produced, is probably Banjo-Kazooie. This is a 3D platformer that really took what Super Mario 64 did, and took it in a bold new direction with a unique pair of protagonists with their own unique abilities and powers and their own setting and world. And the climax of Banjo-Kazooie, their first ever outing, it ends in a very very shocking climax, a very intense boss fight in a game that had no boss fights up to this point. One of my favorite boss fights in all of N64 history. It's a really intense multi-phase fight with all sorts of like things being thrown at you, and things you have to do to prevail, and you know with a really really good payoff. It is incredibly satisfying to see like Gruntilda finally fall. And not only does she fall, she explicitly says she's going to be back in Banjo-Tooie. And unlike the sequel, she actually does they actually did make a sequel. So seeing them like actually give a payoff to that, like that warning at the end that like, ooh, she'll be back for Banjo-Tooie, that is like a very exciting intense thing. And honestly, it's a shame that we never did get a Banjo 3E. Like the developers have consistently like refused to make a Banjo 3, and they refuse to really acknowledge the possibility even after all this time. But the fact that like we did get like a Banjo 2E, like that they like went halfway there on their promise. It was nice to see. Like Banjo 2E has a lot of problems. Rareware was already in like vast decline at this point, but I don't think there's any any denying that Banjo-Kazooie itself was like a monumental moment in video game history. For those of us who grew up to play, actually, I didn't grow up playing this. For those of us who became fans later in life, uh, we can look back at this moment in video games and really appreciate what Rareware did, and really like acknowledge like their contributions to Nintendo software. And this is the pinnacle of that era in video games. It says a lot about the quality of this list that we have to wait a significant period of time to start talking about one of the all-time great Zelda games, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, the darkest title in the franchise by far. The game features a 3-day cycle in which you have to save the world from an apocalypse, and boy, does it really like reminding you that everyone is going to die. But as a result of that, if you can like suffer through the bleakness and like the dark atmosphere and like the general like obtuseness of this one, like you'll come away with the experience that, oh, this is actually when you actually overcome everything about that, you really do feel a sense of accomplishment when you actually do beat Majora and find yourself like leaving Termina, like with no one really understanding who you are or where you came from. It's a surprisingly like melancholy sort of ending that where everyone went through a lot of stuff, everyone suffered, but in the end it doesn't really matter. In the end, like things are going to continue as they always have, and it's because of a hero that nobody knows or no one will remember. Really, it's a really cool ending for a lot of reasons. It demonstrates, I think, the strengths of this game's writing and its world building. It's one of the only Zeldas I feel that really makes you care about the surrounding world and what's going on. Like all of these NPCs are fleshed out. They all have names. They all have backgrounds. They all have personalities. Occupations. There's all this reason to care about what's going on in Majora's Mask. And as a result of that, when it all concludes, you find yourself like very, very taken in by what you just experienced. And of course, like that's just talking about like, the side content. Of course, like the final boss itself is great. The final area itself is very memorable. Getting the true ending, collecting all the masks, unleashing the fierce deity, like all of that is very, very, very memorable. This is a game that I think really does grow on a lot of people. I don't know a lot of people who played this game when it first came out and appreciated it for what it was. It really is something that you really have to like take a lot of time with to understand and appreciate. But when you do, you uncover one of the hidden gems on N64. This was a game that really should have been talked about more in 2000. It was a game that really should have like sold a lot more units and been discussed a lot more. As it happens, this game has become a cult classic, especially on the internet, and it is highly regarded among like core community, the core Zelda fan base, and the core community. So much so, in fact, that I feel like it kind of overshadows other great games. But there's no denying that Majora's Mask is just a stellar title all around. For a lot of people, Super Mario 64 was their first N64 game. For me, I started a little bit later and didn't get into N64 until Donkey Kong 64 had come out. So coming back to Super Mario 64, like, several years after it first came out, of course I played this game at friends' houses and stuff like that, but like, I never owned the game until relatively recently, actually. And, experiencing it the way it is, I have a little bit of a different experience with this one. I find that my experience of playing through the entire game at a friend's house, it felt like a little bit more of an experience than it usually is. It's one of those endings that I played where I can still remember where I was when it happened. Like I just ended up going through Bowser in the sky. I ended up taking on Bowser, and then I ended up winning. And I ended up like experiencing that surprisingly sweet ending where Princess Peach thanks you. She comes floating down from the castle. She thanks you, and she invites you inside for a cake. And that's the ending. And really, it seems relatively simple, but for a kid who's honestly had hardly ever beaten a game before, it was a magical experience. I believe my friend himself had not actually beat the game at that time. So like playing it myself and like beating it like out of the blue like that was quite quite an achievement. I was very happy about it. And I found myself feeling like this sense of elation. It was like the start of an era, I think. My love for video games probably has roots in that moment. Definitely my love for Super Mario 64. I don't think about that moment a lot, but when it comes to the context of like what makes Super Mario 64 a great ending, yeah, that moment does come to mind. That is what makes Super Mario 64 great, is that this is, for a lot of people, the first video game they ever beat. This is the game that kind of defines what a Mario game is for a lot of people. It set the standard, it set the formula. It's the one that everyone kind of looks back to on like what Mario is, like why he's saving the princess, what their dynamic is, what their relationship is, like how this situation normally plays out. Like Mario 64 in a lot of ways is the stereotypical Mario game. Well, stereotypical isn't the way to put it. It's the archetypal Mario game. It really is an example of what a typical Mario adventure is, and it defined several new titles after this, including Paper Mario and several other future titles. It's a remarkable milestone in Nintendo history, and you cannot discuss Nintendo without it. All right, guys, now we're going into the heavy hitters. Star Fox 64 is probably an example of a game that is really deceptively simple in a way. I think most casual players can beat Star Fox 64. Most people who have never picked up an N64 controller can just kind of go through the motions and kind of say, okay, I went to the end of the game. I beat Andros. He was a machine, and that's it. That little stinger at the end, oh, that's just teasing a sequel. No, what actually happens, for those of us who play the game over and over again, is that you realize there are actually multiple paths to the game. There are multiple ways through, and as a result, if you do fulfill specific requirements, specifically, go through a certain route and end up on the left side of Venom, you end up in a completely different situation, and you end up fighting a completely different final boss, the True Andros, as it's known. This path is significantly different than the standard one, significantly more difficult than the standard one. There's all these like kind of iffy aspects to it that make it kind of difficult to reach. It's not hard for like someone who knows what they're doing, but it is the sort of thing that's going to take numerous playthroughs to get right. I myself had to play the game several times over and over and over again to reach the point where I could even figure out what the requirements were, because like they're not always obvious. Getting to Aquas requires 100 kills. Going to like getting to Sector Y requires you like flying through some rings and stuff like that. There are like warp gates. There are all these like questions over like, oh, are there alternate ways to get to where I need to go? Like you end up playing all the levels to try and get like a complete view of like what the game expects from you in your head. And then you actually play through the level and you end up in this like surprisingly difficult final stage where Andros reveals his true form and you confront him for the last time in this game. Anyway, it's a surprisingly compelling boss fight. It's a big upgrade over the original. I struggled with it for a long time before I finally got the hang of it. And then afterward, you get this really cool moment where you have to escape the planet, rather like a Metroid game. And as a result of that, the ghost of your father returns and you have to follow him out. And along the way, he reassures you that like you've become a great pilot and that he's very proud of you and stuff like that. It is a surprisingly heart-wrenching ending. It is Fox has although Fox has like succeeded in his goal of like destroying Andros and putting an end to a war, he will never get his father back. Taking vengeance on Andros is not something that will necessarily make him happy or fulfilled. But at the same time, he couldn't really. It's not like he could do. It's not like he couldn't do anything, right? Like at the very least, he was able to like fulfill his father's mission and put a stop to what Andros's plans for the galaxy, even if his father is dead. It's probably the most bittersweet ending on this list. It's one of my favorite bits of video game storytelling ever. And even now, I look back on like experiencing this moment for the first time very fondly. Doing it myself for the first time was a magical experience. It was just a phenomenal thing that I will always look back on fondly. I love Paper Mario. I don't know if I've emphasized this point enough in recent years. I would say out of like all of like the Nintendo IPs that I'd say are like kind of falling out of favor or aren't really relevant right now. I've talked a lot about like F-Zero, I've talked a lot about Star Fox, I've talked a lot about Metroid. I haven't really talked about Paper Mario all that much. And I think a big reason for that is because I typically like talking about like more fringe, out there, unusual things. And I think Paper Mario, in a sense, is so basic, like Nintendo RPG goodness. It's probably the big RPG franchise for nin- general Nintendo fans. I feel like I don't have anything to add to the conversation. I feel like I don't have this game. I don't know everything about the game. I feel like I don't have anything to add. And as a result of that, I kind of like underestimate just how much I enjoy this game. I actually streamed this game the other day. I was doing some like errands for Koopa Koot, and I was like delivering some letters and stuff like that. Stuff I didn't do in my last playthrough. And it kind of dawned on me just how much I really do still love and appreciate this game, even if I don't like obsess over it constantly like some people. And I suppose there are quite a lot of games like that. Metroid Prime comes to mind. I think Fire Emblem Awakening comes to mind. Like all these games that I consider the GOAT in their respective genres, I don't really necessarily talk about all the time. And as a result of that, I think I have kind of forgotten, honestly, how big of a deal fighting Bowser for the first time in Paper Mario actually was. This was, I think, Paper Mario, I think, was probably my first RPG series other than Pokemon. And I don't think I actually beat Pokemon. So, back when I played this. So, playing Paper Mario for the first time, going like experiencing this story, experiencing this situation where Mario has to go up against the evil King Bowser, and it actually has a plot, and he actually has taken measures to stop Mario from stopping him this time. He has like seven crazy creatures defending like the seven star spirits that you need to like overwhelm his star rod. It is incredible just how much effort and work put into making this fantastic story revolving this stereotypical Mario plot. I'll always say that I actually prefer the original Paper Mario to the Thousand Year Door because it actually feels more like a Mario game. In the Thousand Year Door's case, although I like it, it feels more like a standard JRPG. In a lot of sense, it kind of loses the appeal for me. Like, and because of that, when you encounter Bowser at the end of Paper Mario, it feels a lot like the same situation you had when you went up against him in Super Mario 64, in which like he's way more powerful than he used to be. It's gonna take like all of your skills to beat him. It's gonna be like very very challenging and difficult. And uh, not only that, it actually has some good, fun story bits here. I'll always, even if replaying this stage, this part is a little bit of a slog, I always did like that little bit with like Twink coming in and, doing his thing and kind of like emphasizing that like Bowser kind of doing his thing to prevent Bowser from winning, kind of protecting Princess Peach. In a way, it's endearing, it's charming, it's epic. There's so many cool things to like about it, and at the end, you get a really cool parade featuring all the characters from the game. It's really really cool. It's really really satisfying, really heartwarming. It is a really good ending to a classic video game. And when you get to the very end, when you see Princess Peach, and Mario standing on like the standing on the porch, like looking out the fireworks, like there have been times where I've kind of sat there and like looked at the screen for several minutes, like just taking it all in. Like this was one of those gaming experiences that I'll never forget. It was like a magical moment at the time, and I will never ever forget that. Number one shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. Of course, the best video game of all time will have the best video game ending. And Ocarina is really does not let us down in that regard. Playing through Ocarina, was a great experience all around. This was the first 3D Zelda. It really broke a lot of barriers. And when it all came to a climax, when it all came to a head, and you got to experience that final encounter and destroy Ganon, you really get this sense of like this sense of grandness, of epicness and scale, and like the the good thing that you did. The game is just filled with all kinds of iconic imagery. You have like, the piano as you ascend the tower, you have Ganon destroying the tower, you have the boss fight with him, and you have like the follow-up. You have like the very sweet sort of retrospective on what the characters have just been through, and you have this warning from Ganondorf that, ooh, someday I'm gonna be back. I'm gonna get you, Link. I'm gonna get you. And it's it's it sticks with you. Like even years later, I was considering this the gold standard for Zelda endings for years, and in a way, I sort of do. It kind of establishes, it's kind of established the general format for the series going forward, up until Skyward Sword. It was just the definitive title, and it hits every emotional note. It's intense, it's epic, it's action packed, and it reaches a satisfying conclusion. And I have to say that ending sequence of Link going to see Zelda in the courtyard, it's one of the greatest still shots I think I've ever seen in my life. It really is just a magical moment. Something that I always look back on fondly and really appreciate. I remember as a kid like seeing that moment and just wishing that the game would continue, that like there was some kind of code or some secret I could uncover that would like let us know what the conversation they had actually is. But no, the game is over. That's it. And we would get Majora's Mask, which is a direct sequel to this, but we don't really get a lot of elaboration on like what the state of Hyrule is or like what Zelda is doing or anything like that. It's just like its own unique side story essentially. And although that's interesting for what it is, a part of me wishes we really did get like an Ocarina of Time too. But in a sense, I'm kind of glad we didn't because there's really nothing more that needs to be said. I think all great stories need to know when they need to end. And in Ocarina's case, in Zelda's case, it always seems to know the exact correct time it needs to stop.